God, this is great. It's wonderful. So many people. Raissa's show is up, and it's a beautiful show. And so she is a member of our gallery, ARC, and she is going to talk about her work. So,
Well, thanks, Diane. And I really want to thank so many of you for coming, especially coming last night and again today, because I know that's a lot and I appreciate it. And I really want to thank ARC, like all the members and the gallery here, for giving me this opportunity, because honestly, being a part of the gallery helped me get ready to show here and put this on, seeing how other artists do this and put it all together. And it really is a matter of, it takes a village, for Amy was here to help with putting this together, having other people with the feedback, put it here, this feels better over here, don't clutter this area, spread it out. That community village theme is something that really plays throughout the work, and it's something that I really want to acknowledge. So from all of you who've come here, people who've been in my studio and helped me, the gallery and the members here, it really is about this collective weave of energy and focus that helps make these things come forward. So I'm very grateful for that. It's a collective, and you're all a part of it. And I also, you'll see a theme that's going to come through here. I'm going to talk, and this is obviously an artist talk, but I really do want this to be as conversational as possible. Feel free to interrupt. If you have a question, please ask it. Nobody has to wait until the end. This is meant to be really just a conversation around what it means to both create art and fundamentally what consciousness and human evolution and all of that is about. That's what I'm exploring. So feel free to interrupt, ask questions, and we'll make this a conversation, a dialogue. I'm going to start with a couple of questions that I have thought about throughout the time. And this is kind of a foundation for a lot of the work. And they start with, what does it mean to evolve? So we'll all have different interpretations of that, but the idea of evolution, whether it's your personal evolution or your professional creative evolution, us as a species evolution, the idea of evolution, what does that mean? And why should we care where we come from? Why do we care? Why do we even think about it? What does that even mean? What purpose do we have? Why do we do the things we do? Does any of it mean anything? What are we doing this for? So all of that kind of points to what is consciousness. And that's a huge conversation right now, especially as we go into the digital age and we're moving into more and more AI. And so you're going to see that as a theme that's going to play through here. So the name of this show is Venus Rising, Axiom Schema. Venus Rising might make a little bit more sense because there's Venuses, and that is specifically our prehistoric Venus that I'm speaking of. But it's an archetypal Venus as well. And this idea of, in many cases, the divine feminine. As I go through, I'm going to talk about spirituality as well as science, as well as art history, as well as mythology. I am not an expert in any of these things. I'm an artist. So as an artist, I can ask these questions and let these ideas kind of move through me and come out however they come out. But I love it when I get to have conversations with people who are scientists or are physicists or mathematicians and learn from that. So I think that's a part of this idea of the dialogue or the conversation or the evolution of ideas and exchange. So, okay, I guess I'll just start with, what is Venus Rising Axiom Schema? The idea of Venus Rising, I really have to give a giant shout out and a nod to my mother, who many of you know, was such a huge influence for me and really planted a seed very early on of this idea of a divine feminine. Now, as a staunch Catholic and somebody who was a nun and, you know, took that to her dying day as something she deeply believed in, there was never a conflict for her to also believe very strongly in a divine feminine. There was never a conflict. Those worked very easily together. And so much of her inspiring of me was around this idea of empowerment and the beauty of the feminine and the power within that. So one of the first and earliest books she gave me was this book called Clan of the Cave Bear. I don't know if anybody's ever read it or you know of it, but it is by Jean M. Auel, and it came out in the 80s, and she did a deep dive in fictionalizing a period in prehistory where Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were overlapping. And the main character is a young woman who's a Homo sapien, who's raised by Neanderthals, and you're starting to see the divergence of the brain and the evolution into who we are. And that left an impact. That story left a huge impact on me. It had a lot of very mature themes, and she gave it to me when I was pretty young, and she said, I think you can handle it because you'll see beyond, you know, some of the more problematic bits and get this larger message from it. And this is kind of just funny, I have to share this story. So before I had my foot surgery, and many of us know the rabbit hole that was, my mom and I took a shamanic training class together. So she walks in crippled, can't speak, can't walk, crippled. I walk in a boot. I mean, we looked insane. But the idea from that, or an invitation that came out of that journey, was from an artistic perspective to look to the masters, go to the great masters. So I kind of came out of that thinking like, okay, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, what does that mean? And it wasn't until years later, as I'm getting ready for a sabbatical, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm gonna do during this sabbatical, coming off of COVID and you know, reinventing my creative energy, that it landed on me that it was cave paintings and earliest depictions of our artistic expression. So Venus, and I'm wearing this here, it's a replica that I got at the Hohlefels Cave in Germany. Part of my sabbatical was 3 archaeological digs. This was one of them. This site is where the Venus of Hohlefels and Lion Man, somewhat depicted over there, but represented here, were found. And they mark the earliest known artistic expressions that we've ever created that have lasted. So they are bone carvings of a woman naked, speculation, fertility goddess, training for birthing, early midwifery. There's all sorts of speculation, but we know it had no purpose as a bowl or a weapon or an instrument. It served some other purpose. Same thing with Lion Man. Joseph Campbell, who is an expert in mythology and religion, comparative mythology and religion, referenced these 2 figures when he talked about our evolution consciously as a species. Our early depiction of the feminine is seen naked in her full form, representing our physical humanity here on earth. She is the life giver, she's birthing, and this is what she represents. Whereas Lion Man is, or men in general in prehistoric art, are almost always seen clothed. And that represents the formation of a society and a structure. The symbols, the language, the interaction with the world around us to help create the world that we now live in. And I was thinking about this kind of coming off of the last series I did, which was Venus Rising, period. And it was all an exploration of this kind of divine feminine. I went on that sabbatical last year, or residency in Finland, and felt again this invitation to explore more fully the yin and the yang, the 2 sides of it. And that's where the idea of Axiom Schema came about. So I'll explain that a little bit. Axiom Schema in theoretical math is the first statement of truth. So when you're building a mathematical theory to explain quantum or to build quantum mechanics or any of that stuff. You have to start with what they call an axiom schema. That's the first one. Once you get that established, you can then build your theory off of it. So I was inspired by that idea in looking at the language of math and symbols and basic binary code, which was built on the idea of the first loom machine. So when we were trying to weave more efficiently, we designed the jacquard loom. The jacquard loom was designed on a yes or no idea. You put it here, you don't put it here, and that created your pattern. That pattern was interpreted by a man named Babbitt to make the first computational machine, which started binary code, yes or no. That binary code has now led into what I believe is this amazing phase in our evolution in terms of computation, AI, and playing with reality as we know it. Again, I'm just fascinated with this stuff. So having no real answers, I get to play with it. AI is a thing we get to play with now. So at work, we're being trained. If you don't know, I'm a creative director outside of being an artist. I'm a creative director at a company called the Bradford Exchange for their jewelry department. And a few years ago, they said, let's all get familiar with AI. And I loved this idea. You can program it in, you give it a prompt, and who knows what pops out. I'm fascinated. I'm just fascinated by it. So what you're going to see up here is mostly AI-generated art. This entire wall is generated by AI, and the 4 pieces on either side of that painting are generated with AI. And the idea throughout the work in the back, which really was a premise of the Venus Rising, this was taking those sculptures that are replicas of those Paleolithic Venus figurines, which, by the way, these little things popped up in the hundreds across Paleolithic Ice Age Europe. So from Spain up to Russia, in this era where we had no phones and the only forms of communication were by foot across this vast region, somehow the idea of these little Venuses as a representation of something popped up in the hundreds. And so to me, I was very fascinated with this as maybe a nod to our collective unconscious. Maybe we are tied to something that is greater than what our conscious minds are aware of. And these little Venuses popping up in the hundreds could be a representation of that. So that was Venus Rising. That's where it started. Then as I was moving into this idea of axiom schema, again, trying to bring the yin and yang together, the two sides, you never get one without the other. I think nature's always looking for balance and harmony. So what would be the opposite of that? Where are we going now? Well, let's look at digital art. So some of this is going to be different prompts that I would put in. Sometimes I actually put the prompts into the background of the images. I would then play with them. I would play with adding binary code over them. Many of these have binary code or Schrodinger's theories for quantum mechanics. I don't know how to read it. I don't know. But I know that that's what it is. And I know that those who know it say that's what it is. And I like the visual element that it adds. And I like that it brings a bit of symbology and code as meaning to how we're building the world. So that's a lot of what you're going to see here, like in this scroll, where it's a creation of symbols that seem like they might mean something. They kind of have an ancient feel or hieroglyphic nature to them, or rune symbols. This was created in Finland. So a lot of the inspiration that rose from that location felt somewhat Druidic to me. These little fairies came from the lichen that fell off the trees, and they called it wizard's beard. And so I was like, okay, well, let's make some wizards and really go with that. And then I put the symbols on them. They're scattered kind of throughout the gallery, but each symbol collectively would spell out axiom, which is back to this recursive idea of these notions feeding back in on themselves. One thing that I did want to talk about, and I'm a little bit scattered, but that's a little how this works for me. So the interesting part of my process is I do a lot of research. I love the podcasts out there that give me access to conversations of science, biology, physics, math. I would never have access to without these podcasts and these people sharing this information publicly. I eat that up and I love all of that information. There's a lot of research. But when it comes to the creation, it almost like that part goes blank and something else just comes out. And I don't know until I get that, 300-foot view of what it all means, because it seems to take on its own little pathway through there. So I guess this talk might do a little bit of that too. So I'm going to meander through and just kind of keep going with it. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting, Joseph Campbell talks about this, Carl Jung talks about this. This great book, Gödel, Escher, Bach, by Douglas Hofstadter talks about this. And it's a look at music and art and math. And that in all of them, at some point, you can get this recursive development, which means the further you go, it feeds back in on itself. A lot of what they're finding in science with quantum does this. If quantum is getting to the smallest unit of anything, what happens when they get to that smallest unit? They get to the God principle, that which is consciousness or the unknown or the thing that we can't explain, but it gives that spark, that life, it animates, it brings it forward. And one of the things that Gödel, Escher, Bach will talk about is that is so within, so without. That we are designing this world as our brains are constructed to design and to interpret. So when it comes to the idea, some of these are built with AI images where I would plug in something like do a drawing based on Hofstadter's G-plot and Venus of Holofel's with Python code. That's literally one of the things I put in. I don't know, whatever. Let's see what it pops out. I would get a pop out of one of these crazy designs. Now, I would never have thought that that's what it would give me. And then I would start playing with it and chunking it into itself and letting it turn back in and play with patterns around it. So this is kind of some of the visuals that you'll see here. The idea of the lion and the owl, which is again kind of mirrored back to you at different places throughout the gallery. That was a tie back to Lion Man, a tie back to this idea of dressing within nature, using nature and natural forms of creation to build off of into something new, to imagine ourselves in there, to transport ourselves through our understanding of that physical experience into imagination and beyond. So Lion Man, which kind of looks like a bear, but artistic license, is mirrored across with a lion that is a mirror that invites you to see yourself back into it. The eagle or owl as that widely recognized animal symbol for spiritual transcendence. It flies into the sky. It goes up and beyond. And so again, a mirror back into that. So some of this will have the lion and the eagle to mirror back to all the different places throughout the exhibition. You'll have Lion Man or the Venus of Blossom Bluey. I can't say that one, but she's painted over there. And she's also over here. It's the oldest depiction of a human face that we've ever found so far. This is a changing science. I mean, they could dig something up and, all of this could change tomorrow. But as it stands right now, these are the foundational elements that we used to create. And I wanted to bring in nature to it. Bones from Thanksgiving dinner, they're in here. Bleached them out, put them in here. Feathers found from birds in the neighborhood. All of these trees are from walking around my neighborhood, using clay as a way to sculpt and replicate these Venuses that are air dry. These are the natural elements to play with as I juxtapose them with digital images. So these were really fun over here because this was playing with the idea of a torus, which is, bear with me because I wrote it down because I'm like, what is the torus again? It is part of a build off of sacred design and sacred geometry. So it's a donut in every shape. It circles out this way and that way. And it creates kind of this contained and endless circle. So prompt in AI, create a torus in a cave-like setting with earth tones. It pops out these 4 backgrounds, and then I'll play with adding Venuses in here, adding the binary code in here, playing with different mathematical equations for quantum, because I can, because it's just fun to do. A lot of this is playing with sacred geometry. In fact, the Venus design, so Venus as a idea that plays from astronomy to mythology to art to love to all of this. Venus, well, what is that? It's a planet in the sky that has an 8-year pattern that has moved through the sky to make a 5-point pentagon flower pattern, the rose. And that is the Venus in the sky that has been interpreted in mythology as the symbol of love because of this rose pattern that it makes over an 8-year cycle. So I wanted to put a rose in here. So there's all these different hidden little elements of ideas, seeds of ideas that I don't know where they're going to land or what they're going to do. You know, we were talking about it in the car coming down here of what is the idea of evolution? What does this mean? And I was thinking about the fact that it never ends, you know, like there's going to be some other idea that's going to be built off of this. There's going to be some other next iteration that comes from what's planted now. I think that's some of what is going on with this idea of shadows and mirrors that I really wanted to also play with. The idea of the branches and the roots. Branches is also a nod to half the people here in the room. My mom's maiden name is Branch. And so this idea of these branches that go out like lungs that are in, like roots that go down, this design pattern that seems to weave through and connect so many elements. The shadow of things. I really was appreciative of the gallery and the help that everybody had with putting these together, and this idea of creating shadows, that which we can't see. The whole mythology of the allegory of the cave, where if you only saw the shadows, you would think that's what life was. And there's a whole other world out there that can open up if you saw beyond that ledge. And these are ideas that just fascinate me. And this is part of what I love about being an artist, is that without having any answers, I can continue to explore and see what the next seed will lead to, and see where it'll go. But I also very much appreciate that there is a constant theme of the Venus rising. So I guess I'm going to step back now and probably come close to concluding, but I do want to really talk about her. The idea of Venus rising is something that I played with for a really, really long time. And it really is a matter of believing and feeling deeply in this feminine energy that is emerging. Life is a constant look towards balance and harmony of the yin and yang. I think that's how nature seems to demonstrate itself and expand and grow. And so Venus rising is looking at and feeling what this energy is. And for some of you in the chat text group, there's been people who are worried and the state of the world and politics and all of this. And I have said, you know, don't give in to fear. Find your highest vibration and let that take root so that it can move through you and expand through you. And she's a lot of that for me. When I went to Finland originally, I thought I was going to do some sort of art that was co-creation in nature. I was going to bury paper in the ground and let it deteriorate and bring it up and play with the dirt and the way it was affected and all of that. But it was Finland in March, so you're not burying anything. Okay, it was not, that wasn't happening. And I come back and I know I have this show coming up in a year and I've got to start planning for it. I knew I was going to have this beautiful window and I wanted to do something great with it. And I knew I had all this Venus art. So I was actually thinking I was going to do a really large lion man sculpture that was going to go in the center here. And I had a friend in town and we were figuring out how to sculpt with foam, and we're in my garage and we're trying to sculpt foam. I'm going to do this giant lion man. And all of a sudden he looks over and he goes, "What is this?" And he pulls a net of spider webbing off of her bust. I sculpted her 30 years ago in college. It was a class course in sculpting with plaster. She'd been in my mom's house. She had been in my backyard. We moved. She got put in the garage where she sat for a few years, slowly deteriorating and being covered with spider webs. And when she got pulled out, I realized she was the co-creative element with nature that I was looking for. But it had the element of time. It took 30 years for her to kind of deteriorate and become this, worn and weathered. And yet here she stands, reborn. This energy comes forward. So created a body for her. I wanted her to be pregnant, much like many of the Venuses that you've seen, pregnant with this idea of potential, of our endless potential. And I loved the idea of having, I didn't know what I was going to do with her arms. To be honest with you, it was just a structural conundrum. I tried stuffing them. She looked weird. I wasn't sure. I was like, do I put branches out of her sleeves? I couldn't figure it out. And then I started collecting these branches. And at one point I just had one in the studio and it stood behind her and it made this beautiful winged arm that spread out like an angel, like a wing, like a tree. But it seemed to bring her all together. And so, it was the very clear realization that this was the focal point for me. While Venus Rising went through that journey and came forward with Axiom Schema, whatever that means, I get to play. And then, wherever she'll go next, it's the energy that I really appreciate here. So I'm thrilled with the way it looks. I'm just really grateful again for the gallery and the space, the support, and all of you showing up. And I guess I said I'd leave room for questions. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I really do appreciate everybody coming and being here.
The opening last night, I was real curious about the symbols on that and the material and how, at first I thought, my God, did she sit there and draw each little symbol, or was that printed somehow? So I'm real curious how.
I sat there and I drew each and every symbol.
You did?
I did.
Because I said to my husband's looking at it too, and I said, I don't think she did it because all the lines are so even. Mm-hmm. How did you do that?
So I put a grid board behind it, and then I would just scroll it and line it up so that each time it was in a row. So I did hand draw it. So when I was in Finland for that month, part of it was in silence. And I had, for those of you who have seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, I had a beautiful mind moment where I was in my little room studio by myself and I just started doing symbols and shapes and symbols and shapes. And I had brought rolls of this transparency paper, not knowing what I was going to do with it. It was just part of like the stuff. And so I was covering my walls with it. And then I started exploring the idea of codes and symbols meaning something. And in math and theoretical math, each symbol relates to something and it means something. And these are kind of made up symbols, but when everybody agrees to it, it's something else. And I created an alphabet and I started writing in this other language. So this is the alphabet that I created that I just wrote over and over and over again. Amy here cracked the code when we were setting this up because, do you want to tell them how you figured it out?
Cyrus could talk to it too. He cracked it.
With your influence.
Well, so I helped Raissa, and I was here all day Monday helping all the people set this up, and I love to crack a good code. And so I started at these two full sets of 4 dots, and I was like, there's a pattern happening. There's got to be a pattern. So then I started looking for how many there are in that pattern, and there's 27. And then I was like, that's conveniently close to 26. And then I started to see some of the letters of like the English alphabet come through, and then I started to backtrack. This wasn't the beginning of it, but when I backtracked it, I found that this was where every I don't want you.
No, you did it. Do it.
So this is kind of where the And then if you notice, there's some kind of like likening to the English alphabet, the English font, but or the North American. I don't know. But in any case, it was really sad.
Does it tell a story, or is it more about you're creating these symbols that have, each symbol has a meaning for you?
No. So this is really more of just, this is an alphabet, and it's playing with the idea of creating symbols that have meaning. That's what we've done as a species. We've created symbols, we collectively agree that they have meaning, and then we apply them in the creation of the world around us. So that was just exploring that. But then I did want to use them on the figures. In my mind, I was going to do a whole lot of storytelling and try to figure out how to use that in a greater story, which might be the next evolution of this journey. But it hasn't gotten there quite yet. So it's the inception, and it might become a larger story.
Well, what I think is so exciting is that you left the field open, and who, like you said, who knows where you'll go with it. But that's the beauty of being an artist,
Yeah.
and being able to explore. And I think that must be so exciting for you.
And having a community. Like this
Yeah.
is clearly like a really special place for all of you.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, I agree.
We agree.
It's a lovely home.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, kind of it meant a lot to me to be able to do this, and especially have this Venus that I'm just so in love with, be here at ARC, which is the second oldest women's run cooperative gallery in the nation.
Wow.
Yay, ARC! Seriously. Honestly, Stacy's our president over there. She's done an amazing job. And we have other gallery members here, Rudy, obviously Diane, Nancy. But like, this is an amazing group of women who have been consistently following the mission of giving women a space to show work. And I'm really grateful to be here in this space with these women and artists. I want you too.
We are 50 years old.
Mhm.
So Raissa and I are newer members. Some of these members have been here, I don't know how many years.
Very long.
But, keeping the place strong, and this is very exciting.
Yeah.
So what's the material that?
It's actually just like vellum. It's a roll of transparency paper from Blick that was bought before I left for Finland, and I used a lot of it. And then I actually should acknowledge another wonderful person, Sarah Krepp, who a few of us are in a critique group with. She kicked my butt when I needed it kicked to get this going, because I was like, I'm doing all sorts of things. And she's like, when's your show? Get going. But she came to my studio and saw this. I wasn't planning on putting this in, to be honest with you. I was digging through files of other things to show her something else I had done in Finland. And she saw a small bit of it. And she said, what is that? And she said, do that. Do a whole wall of that. Hire an assistant to help you do the wall of that. I'm like, okay, I'm really panicked about trying to string mirrors together and get branches on the ceiling. I don't know how I'm going to do it all. But I just laid this out in my dining room, and like when I would find time, I would just kind of sit and did one scroll. And then it was towards the end where it was like, okay, we were figuring out how to string branches from ceilings, and he was already set up in one part of my studio, and I liked him being the representation of it. Again, thematically, the idea of the lion man or the yang energy as this that creates the symbols and language and structures that we use to create within this physical world. So I wanted them to be together, and so that's how that came about.
Okay, I have another question. I'm, as a working artist, I'm always interested in the process and how people do what they do, the materials and the process. So I'm looking at this guy and I go, what is this? Paper mache? Is he plastered? What's the armature that's holding him up? So do you want to just answer that?
Yes. So, Stacy, you're not going to know this, but this was somewhat inspired by you in a conversation we had, honestly, a year and a half ago. And we were here putting a show together, and you casually mentioned knowing somebody who had built an entire sculpture out of tape, like just doing tape or something like that. Like they were just wrapping tape around tape around tape around tape. And I was like, that sounds like such a fun project to like lose yourself in just taping something. So I went home, you were with me, and I started like gathering Amazon Prime boxes and taping them together. And I kind of knew I wanted to do Lion Man because I was already at this stage where Venus was such a feminine thing, and I wanted it to extend outward into a greater collective. So I kind of had an idea I was going to do Lion Man, and I loved this idea of just using tape. I bought a bunch of tape off of Amazon and just started taping it, and then I started using the boxes to make it bigger, and it grew into that structure. And then I used paper mache. So I found a recipe for paper mache clay that uses joint compound, flour, glue, and you just kind of,
Sounds like fun.
yeah, it was.
Spider webs.
Yeah, whatever else you can get in there. So I just started building him from that. And that's the same material for that Venus back there. And in fact, she is basically an Amazon box. And at one point, I was like, is that too square? Because I thought I would soften her edges and make her rounder. And she just was real boxy, like the Amazon box that's underneath there. And I was like, I don't know, I kind of dig it. So I just kind of let her keep a lot of that. But they're both paper mache. Yeah.
I love that it is a combination of new things
Mm-hmm.
and old ideas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do too. It's that evolution, and I love, like, I don't know what will take seed and be the next thing. Maybe it'll be this. Maybe I'll do a whole series on this. The interesting thing about storytelling, the back piece has that right up on the wall over on the side, and when I was first coming back from the first sabbatical, where I went to the caves and started really looking at these little replicas of all these Venuses and sculpting them and whatnot, I came back and I had a show in Evanston, and I was talking to a friend about it, and she goes, the thing is, I'm not sure you're like as much an artist as like a storyteller. And so I wrote up a story of our emerging and shifting a mythology of our evolution. And so I'm guessing that these two will someplace come together in the future with more story and code. I like the idea of art as visual poetry. Like it's just this idea of like playing with it. Did you?
A curiosity. So you're thinking about what is next for your storytelling and art concept work. Thinking back into your past, what stories that you told through your own art have brought you to this place? Your painting, your I Ching, blah, blah.
Well,
Baby Cyrus, this pendant.
Well, all of the above. I mean, I don't know how to answer that because there's a lot to it. Tell me what you want to, like, what.
So I Ching was your most closely associated storytelling here, but there isn't a lot of I Ching that comes up here, but there's not I Ching.
Right.
So curious, just that, and that too is
Okay.
binary.
Okay. So I can talk about the I Ching. That's good. So I Ching, I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with it, but it's actually one of the oldest forms of divination known to humanity. It's ancient Chinese. It's called the Book of Changes, and it's based the Confucianism, the idea of the yin yang are based on the I Ching. The I Ching came first, and it's based on this idea of harmony within nature through a simple polarity of opposites. So when you do an I Ching reading, you throw coins, and if it's an even number or an odd number, based on if it's heads or tails, you're going to either do a solid line or a broken line. And the way those stack up, solid, broken, broken, solid, solid, broken, in a hexagram of 6, will lead you back to a reading. And it has very much a sense of how things work in harmony in nature. So my mom was very big in the I Ching, and because Carl Jung, who, if you're familiar with him at all, his idea of the collective unconscious was based on the I Ching. He was good friends with a man named Wilhelm, who came back from the fall of Imperial China with this knowledge, imparted it to Carl Jung, who then developed a lot of his ideas of the collective unconscious on the I Ching. So I was doing a lot of I Ching readings, and they're very much about ways to live to bring about harmony in your life. And I'm painting these in an abstract way. I'm not a great abstract painter. I do better with representation. I was trying. And then meanwhile, I had these prehistoric Venuses. And as I was looking at the prehistoric Venus, I was seeing the breasts, the stomach, the thighs as broken, solid, broken. And so it became an abstraction of the water symbol. In I Ching, broken, solid, broken is water. And so I started seeing this connection between the I Ching symbol for water and the Venus. And you have one of the original paintings that was done of that, where it's the most obvious in its abstraction. And that started me thinking about the idea of the unconscious as symbolized in water, or in Greek mythology, Venus springing from the water. And so there was all of this kind of play in there. So I started playing with ideas of water and fire. This is actually the fire symbol. It's the opposite of water. So I put her in the corner. The other painting has water in the corner. But the biggest nod I did to I Ching here is if you were to flip this, it's the water symbol. It's the broken, solid, broken of the water symbol of the I Ching, which I early had thought of as a representation of the feminine, and led me down a lot of this.
Yesterday at the reception, I was kind of looking through and I saw a little sort of mirror throughout and kind of came up with my own story.
Ooh, I want to hear it.
Well, I was telling Lake is a 7-year-old that was here. I said, I think it's, for me to kind of see my reflection throughout and how I fit into this. And that's one of the things. I have one of my all-time favorite pieces in the world is a piece that I bought from Raissa, and it just every day resonates with me. So I was trying to put myself in that. But you started to say something about it and about these little mirrors across. And I also noticed them like on the line and so forth. And I heard you say a little bit about it. Is it, please correct me, is it because it tying it all together? Was that what you're?
So I started with sacred designs. So when I was looking at the Venus flower, the pentagram 6-shaped Venus flower, and I was looking at sacred design, the hexagram is one of the primary sacred designs. It's, the star that goes inside of it. It's a fundamental design. And it's also used in a lot of physics and chemistry in terms of like oxygen and how molecules will form and fit together. And you'll see that a lot there. And it's also it's a design that's all over the place. You'll see it on tiles. You see it everywhere. Like the hexagram is a sacred design that has embedded itself so deeply in our collective experience that it's everywhere. So I liked the idea that I wanted to put them around. You're right, that it was all this reflecting back in and of ourselves, that we're all a part of this experience. We're mirrored back throughout the experience into it. I put it on the surface because I liked the way it broke up mirror on mirror texture, and I liked it that it was kind of creating again a reflection back into other parts of the installation, because I'm still calling this an installation. And like even now, just watching them kind of twinkle throughout there, and it gives flashes of light, and it plays with both its shadow and then its reflection. I just thought it was a nice visual element that was subtle but helped tie it together. Thanks. Yeah, CK.
Hi, I'm really interested specifically in when you talk about some of the oldest artwork that we have documented in cave paintings, this sort of thing. I'm really interested in what you're thinking with that original moment of the human conception of how to make a drawing, how to make a sculpture. That that it was a step in human consciousness that is still debated. I was really curious about your take on how these drawings and sculptures came to be, if there was a thought process, what that thought process was, and how you would find it similar or different to the way AI is starting to respond to our own art.
Right. Well, that's a great question, because that really is probably one of the fundamental curiosities that I'm exploring in this work. So what we know, and it was so funny because as I love the serendipity of it, I'm starting to do all these Venuses and I'm sculpting them, and National Geographic about 2 years ago did an entire spread on who were the original artists. And they talked about both cave paintings and these Venuses, and they said they were most likely women because they were like, think about it. If you were going to go into childbirth, which is now the most dangerous thing that you could do, giving birth, because humans giving birth, we're somewhat premature, our large brains, which is again part of our evolutionary journey. So we have these large brains and a relatively small passage because we have to stand upright. We've got our narrower hips compared to some others. So all of a sudden giving birth can be one of the most dangerous things a woman's going to have to do. So none of the Paleolithic Venuses, common elements, no faces. None of them have any faces. That's why the Blasem Bluey, I'm butchering that name. I have no idea how you say it, but it's here and it's also the main face back there is notable in that it's a face because there are no other faces. So the idea was if you're going to go and you're finding yourself pregnant, you're about to give birth, you might want to try to elicit a greater power to help you in that journey into the birthing process. So National Geographic did this whole article about women being the artists who are, what would happen if you look down at your own body during pregnancy? Everything's exaggerated, the exaggerated breast, the exaggerated stomach, thighs, you kind of know what else is going on down there. And so like you would, and that's how many of these Venuses are depicted. They're tiny, they're carved out of bone or stone for the most part, and they're this exaggerated example of a woman, not as somebody looking at a woman, almost as a woman looking down on herself. And so that was something that I was really like amazed by, They also talked about there in like caves like in Lascaux, they were talking about how deep into some of the oldest cave paintings are deep into the recesses of these areas. That's why they were so well preserved. They've been underwater for years and all of this. And so the idea that when they measure the actual handprints or the footprints or the openings to get into these areas, more likely than not was a woman or a small child who was going in there and creating this artwork. So National Geographic did this whole thing I thought was really interesting. Why did we do this? Nobody thinks that this was in order to necessarily communicate like bison that way if you're looking for the hunt. It wasn't that. It was a deep recess of going deep into the earth, Mother Earth, and connecting with something. And again, the spirit is really what I'm going to go back to. It is that which transcends. It's a connection to something greater than us. When you live in a world where death is imminent, you see it all the time, life is precarious and you're holding on to the best you can, your association with death and the afterlife might be even greater. So this understanding that there's something beyond us that they were trying to connect to and look for either guidance, help, or something with. And I think when you look at AI now, this is where I'm going to get into the recursive design idea, that as within, so without. Our brains and our biology are hardwired to perceive the frequencies and energy of the world in a certain way. We all have the same eyes that see the same range. We have the same ears that hear the same range. Our minds are designed to perceive the world this way. So as we are projecting outward as our brains can process, it's coming back to us. And that's a lot of what we're doing with AI. We are putting it out there as our brains are hardwired to be, and it's feeding back to us as it is, because we're training it as we are. So I think, I don't know where AI is going to go. I know that's a hot topic and that'll be explored in further areas. I just think it's an interest. I'm not going to be afraid of it. I'm going to go there. I'm going to explore with it. I'm going to see what it does. I don't know, but I think it's fascinating. And I think we are creating in our own likeness, and we are making in our own likeness, and we are putting out what is inside, and we are seeing, and it's reflecting back into us. Yes.
Any other questions?
You're pretty
This
lovable.
was great.
Can we let Ella just ask?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You kind of just answered it, but I was wondering about the Amazon boxes. When you said that, AI and Amazon and like that kind of the way our society has gone that way for
some people it represents like a loss of connection. And this whole show is about the weaving and the connection and it goes so far so it can come back.
Mhm.
And I was wondering if that's why you use AI and Amazon boxes, because you had even like labeled it as that, or if it's just proving your point that that's what humans do and that's what art is.
Well, I think it would be the latter. You know, like, again, I didn't think about that when I was putting it together, but I can see that, and it does make sense. And I'm very like, yes, I think that is exactly what it is. This is what humans do. This is what we're doing. We're buying things off Amazon. We are, you know, exploring AI. This is where we're at. So it landed right here. Because this is it. Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.